All right, David, the red light just came on. Are you nervous? You okay?
Nah, I'm not nervous.
He's ready
Everything's
to
good.
go, guys. He's ready to go. Let's jump into it. Well, why don't you do my listeners a favor? Why don't you introduce yourself, tell them
Sure.
who you are, and what your project is?
My name is David Craig. I'm the CEO of Sarcomatrix. Sarco means muscle from a medical perspective. Matrix is to reform a structure. And what we do is focus on the drugs that are protein small molecules, oral IV, that can regenerate and stabilize muscle for a variety of diseases.
Wow, wow. So, kind of walk me through a little bit on like mission, how you got
Yeah.
here. How did this? How are you working on this problem?
So I've been Lou Gehrig said I'm one of the luckiest guys alive. And I think in the biotech space, I'm one of the luckiest guys alive because I was fortunate to work at Amgen when they were just 100 people.
Hmm.
So I'm one of the team that helped build them up to products on the market, millions in sales, and thousands of people in the company. And in the early days, after 5 years of doing that, I realized that this option thing was a pretty good gig.
Hmm.
So after 5 years, and most of my options were vested. I just go to the next company.
Hmm.
So I'm a serial biotech startup guy, and I've been at 7 different companies. The two most successful, Amgen and Gilead, are now the seventh and eighth largest biotech companies in the United States. So I know how to build companies.
Right.
Now, that being said, 37 years in the industry, and the company I was at, Portola, was bought by AstraZeneca. They offered me a job in Maryland, but I happen to live in Lake Tahoe, so I prefer to stay here in Lake Tahoe. So, how I got there to my own company was I thought, well, I've been leaving my family during the week and going to the Bay Area. And I thought, well, at least I'll see what's going on in the backyard.
Yeah.
So I went to the University of Nevada, Reno, and I met with Grace Chow, the chief innovation officer there. And her response when I showed up was, "Thank God you showed up."
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she goes, "Well, there's a lot of NIH funding of several labs here at the university. And one of the objectives of NIH funding is eventually economic development. So there's a need to move products from the bench into the marketplace."
Hmm.
So that day that I met her, she made me an entrepreneur in residence, which is an interesting title and actually opens up some doors when you talk to angels, VCs, and others.
Mm-hmm.
But the real good thing was about it is, as a life science EIR, I had carte blanche to meet with all the labs.
Oh, wow.
So I met with labs that have drugs, labs that have devices, labs that have vaccines. And when I look at all the opportunities at University of Nevada, Reno, it looks to me like there's at least 5 companies
Hmm.
that need to be spun out.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I started Sarcomatrix and focused on the Dean Burkin lab, first of all, they're they're a world class lab with expert. They are the experts in integrins and laminins. And integrins and laminins make up two of the really important structural components of muscle. And they understand the pathophysiology and the physiology of muscle regeneration, which um, both Dean Burkin and Ryan Wubbles, who run the lab, came from University of Illinois years ago. And Illinois is known for its kinesiology studies and its muscle regeneration and athletic performance studies.
Hmm.
So they have a really good pedigree. And I thought, well, if I bring my 37 years of experience and all my contacts through bio together with their science, there's a good thing here.
Yeah.
And there is. And listen, as an aside, there's personal reasons why I'm involved in this too, Jeff. I have relatives that have congenital muscular dystrophy.
Hmm.
And this past 20th, my niece, Chloe, who was 37 years old, not 37, I'm going to have to edit that out. She was 31 years old. She passed away from her disease
Hmm.
on February 20th. And I was really hoping that I could be able to accelerate a drug development that would help her and that she can hang around. We actually did find a clinical study out of the Netherlands that she could participate in, but it was a little bit early. But regardless, I figured at this stage of my career, I want to give back. there's really important drugs in the Burkin lab that need to be pushed into the marketplace.
Yeah.
They need to be commercialized into the marketplace, and they can have a huge impact on people living with muscle diseases, starting with muscular dystrophies.
Sure.
So that's what gets me up at 5 a.m.
Yeah. That's great.
And that's why Chloe is my guiding star now
Yeah.
as we go forward.
That's awesome. So did you have a sense that you were going to go down this direction at some point from her? Were you inspired by her and that's why you were looking for some of this stuff? Or was it just kind of happenstance that it kind of came together, like you're describing?
Great question, Jeff. It kind of came together. In fact, when I called up Larry, 70-year-old successful attorney, brother-in-law in Minnesota, and I asked him, "What are you doing to treat your disease?"
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Nothing."
Hmm.
I said, "Well, Larry, why aren't you doing anything? That seems a little silly to me. Chloe's 30 now. At least, are you keeping up with what she's got going on?" And as I talk to people in the muscular dystrophy community, they kind of fall into this. They just get by
Mm.
day to day.
Mm.
And early on, Larry said to me, "Listen, I used to keep up on drugs and I had a lot of hope, but such little has happened through the years. I just stopped looking."
Mm.
And I said, "Well, okay, let's kind of reset here.
Yeah.
First of all, have you had a genetic screen?" And he's like, "No."
Mm.
I said, "Well, did Chloe have a genetic screen?" "No." "Okay, let's get you a genetic screen so we know what type of muscular dystrophy you have." And Larry went up to University of Minnesota. They live in Minnesota. And Chloe went down to the Mayo, and they got their results back. And it turns out that they both have an ultra rare RYR1 variant of congenital muscular dystrophy. And there's only 400 individuals in the United States that have this.
Wow.
So I did, like I said, I found a company that was developing a small molecule that could potentially treat them. And it's a really good group, Amgro. And they are advancing an NIH discovered drug into clinical trials. But like I said, not in time for Chloe, but
Sure.
hopefully I can help Larry out.
Yeah.
So that's that. I kind of, to your question, I kind of backed into it and then connected the dots and then realized this means a lot more to me
Right.
than just making money.
Sure. Right. So, for laymen out there or people who just don't know what are starting points in this? I mean, is it obviously probably on the science? Is it, how do drugs like this even start? Like, what is the process of that? Is it
No,
happening?
good question.
Yeah, I guess, I'm a layman. I've never created a drug. I've never even been in this world. So how do you kind of think about
Well,
this is our
so,
starting?
so NIH funds billions of dollars every year into many different university research labs.
Mm-hmm.
And their objective is to do basic research to identify a target or the cell signaling pathways or the kinases or whatever the underlying pathophysiology is and the potential targets.
Mm.
And then when you have the target, some of them are modified using monoclonal antibodies. Some are upregulated using oral small molecules. Some are modified using large molecule protein replacement, that type of stuff.
Mm.
And then once they have the target, they'll work through several different compounds to come up with a lead. And at that point is when they should get involved with a pharmaceutical company, because then the pharmaceutical company will come in and identify all the steps that are needed and the studies that are needed to create an investigational new drug application, IND application. And once you get that filed with the FDA and approved, now you can go into first in human studies. And then there's 3 levels of studies. The first one is usually you take your drug and give it to healthy volunteers. And what you want to make sure is that you start really low dose and then you escalate. So you're finding a dose range.
Mm-hmm.
You're proving that it's safe that you can give it to humans and that you're getting an idea of kind of side effects. And then as you take blood draws along the way, you can figure out what the half-life is, expiration, how it's excreted, and some variables that you need to really develop the drug. Once you get that data, then you go into what we call a phase 2 proof of concept study. So it's a small study, usually placebo-controlled. You might use 4 or 5 different doses. And what you're looking for is efficacy signal there. Mm-hmm. So in the muscle space, we measure creatinine kinase because that's the chemical that's released when muscle is damaged. Like if you went in for a heart attack and you think you have a heart attack, they'll take a blood draw and they're looking for creatinine kinase in the blood.
Hmm.
And they get a baseline. And then the reason why you have to sit there for 2.5 more hours is then they got to get another blood draw, look at the CK, and then they look to see if there's a delta there. But
Hmm.
regardless, that's the biomarker. And once you see that you're making an impact on a biomarker that suggests that you're having an impact on the disease, then you go into phase 3, which is usually 2 or 3 doses at the most, placebo controlled, large, statistically significant, and that's the filing study. Yet typically you do 2 phase 3 studies,
Yeah.
and then that's what you file with the FDA. So from a drug development perspective, up to target and lead is the university, and then beyond is the pharmaceutical company. And at the end of the day, I know it's really expensive to develop drugs. They're easy to manufacture. They can be
Yeah.
cheap and easy to manufacture, but the cost of clinical development from phase 1, 2, and 3 on average is about $800 million to $1.2 billion.
Wow. Wow.
So that's where the big money comes in.
So I've had some experience in manufacturing of products and stuff attached to universities, and sometimes it's been a little bit of a, it's been challenging sometimes. Let's say,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, you got a lot more cooks in the kitchen. There's even who owns the rights to this, since the
Oh, yeah.
university.
Yeah,
How does
yeah.
that work in pharmaceuticals? I've never talked to anybody that might even know the answer to this. But what does it
No,
look
it's
like with the university?
that's a really good question. Like all the different startups that I've been through, and I've had my own on the side. You always go through that bumpy phase where who owns what,
Hmm.
who does what. You sort all that stuff out. And I'm in the middle of that right now with the Burkin lab, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's really important to have a good relationship with the licensing person at the university.
Mm.
That licensing person is the one. So university labs, anything to develop in a university lab with a federal grant
Hmm.
is owned by the university.
Oh, okay.
So the drug company goes to the licensing agent to license the IP, but you want to make sure that the lab is working on projects that will support the development of the drug.
Mm.
So there is this back and forth and collaboration. And I think in general, the university lab guys, listen, if I was working on one project for 20 years, I would have a lot of ownership in that.
Right. Right.
And I would want to see that baby gently taken out of my hands
Hmm.
so that it could grow up.
Right.
And you have to, I think it's important for pharmaceutical company executives to understand that's a very delicate process,
Sure.
and to be very patient, keep communication lines open, educate where need be, and then make sure that you ask a lot of questions and answer questions that arise.
Yeah.
But you have to work at it.
Sure.
It's not going to happen magically.
Right. 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 Let's talk a little bit about sort of market size and kind of how your approach is. I think it was interesting that you just mentioned that right, your niece had one of 400 people have,
Yeah,
right. So like that's not a very big market size, but how do you approach sort of pharmaceutical market size? And hey, this is going to be X big. This is going to be, very focused. And how
yeah,
does that weigh on decisions of investment, how much time to put into it? I got
yeah,
to imagine, unfortunately, there's business conversations attached to all of this as well, right? It feels like, hey, you should just make a drug. It saves one person. But I got to imagine that that's just not, unfortunately, how it works. But how do you sort of navigate market size in the space?
yeah. Listen, in the 4 decades of my experience, has changed a lot. It used to be early on, you would look for a consumer market, broad market, right? So
Right.
big pharma was really only interested in hypertension, cholesterol lowering, huge markets.
Right.
At that time, when I was at Amgen in the late 80s, early 90s, they did come out with what's called an orphan drug status.
Mm.
So any indication for treating a specific disease that has less than 200,000 individuals in the United States is considered orphan drug.
Oh.
And the FDA put that program in place along with Congress to stimulate development of drugs for small markets. And what you get with that is 7 years of market exclusivity post launch in
Okay.
the marketplace. And then you get reduced filing fees when you do the FDA submissions. And usually along the way, you'll get something called breakthrough therapy, fast track, and accelerated approval, which allows you to simplify the regulatory filing process and basically scale back the number of people you need in the clinical trials and the cost of the clinical
Hmm.
trials. So overall, it's very favorable to get an orphan drug indication.
Yeah.
Now, through the 90s and into the 2000s, big pharma kind of woke up to this and they're like, hey, wait a minute, this kind of rare disease thing is you can actually make money doing it,
Yeah.
right? It's a cool thing. But the cost per patient is going to have to go through the roof.
Right. Right.
So
Hmm.
there's certain companies like Alexion that specialized exclusively in rare and ultra rare. So rare is typically 200,000 or less, ultra rare is 10,000 or less.
Oh, okay.
And you're usually looking at the United States, Europe, Japan, and maybe other markets that can really support expensive drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So, Alexion was kind of the first one that really pushed the upper limits on the cost per patient. It used to be like 100K per patient per year was, not that unreasonable, although it sounds like a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they pushed that up to 300 and 400K per year. And frankly, with the ultra rare drug that they have, where there's only 80 patients, in order to make the numbers work, they actually have to charge $2.7 million per patient per year.
Wow.
So this is where
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a real struggle for the system to pay for these really expensive therapies.
Sure.
They're just going to have to either become less expensive, or we're going to have to figure out some type of funding mechanism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even gotten to the point where CRISPR and gene editing, I don't know if you've looked at some of the approvals of late, but Sarepta's gene editing drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy that is in the space that we're at right now, it's not as effective as they would like, I think is a fair statement. Let's just leave it at
Yeah.
that. But they're charging $3.2 million per patient. And theoretically, it's a single point treatment. And I get that. If you're you pay a big money up front and you cure the disease, you don't have it for the rest of your life. But the problem is we don't know if it's durable or not.
Mm.
And early indications suggest that it's not. So you might have to re-administrate this every 5 years.
Wow.
So the pharmaceutical company is getting a little more creative. And what they're basically saying is that, okay, I'll guarantee the drug works. And if it doesn't work within X period of time, I'll rebate you back Y amount of money.
Oh, okay.
And they're starting to sort that out right now. Now, what's interesting is insurance companies and payers hate this because they assume that the average patient in their plan is going to be there for 5 or 7 years, maybe.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They're not there for their lifetime.
Yeah.
So they don't want to have to pay a big chunk of money up front for the single point therapy when they know that patient is going to go on to another plan in 4 or 5 years. They'd rather have smaller incremental ongoing payments.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that came up when we started running these models was they didn't know how to accrue for it. How do you accrue for the liability that may be rebated back? And there's just accounting issues to figure out.
Yeah.
So we're sorting all that interesting stuff out right now.
That's crazy. How does international play into this? I've had lots of conversations on this podcast, and I thought something interesting was, is there scenarios in your world that you go, hey, we can do the testing in Australia because blah, blah, blah. They have different levers to pull, and that will fast track us over here. Or what, how do you, is that something that you guys look at as well? In your
what's happening is other countries are really putting incentives in place to lure biotech investment and opportunity. Let's get real.
Mm-hmm.
Australia, you brought that up. They have a reduced IND filing, so basically it's a less rigorous, less costly process to get investigational new drug approval. Now, that being said, you have to be very careful. Did you check all the boxes that you need for your FDA filing in the United States,
right,
or European filing, or wherever you want to be? You have to be very careful about how you design those studies. And then they tend to be more expensive than the initial study. And then, as an example, Korea really wants to get into manufacturing right now. And then there's a lot of Chinese manufacturing going on. Well, you can see that there's a lot of concern in Congress right now about technology transfer. And they're starting to shut down some of the really big, WuXi's one of them, Chinese CDMO, a contract manufacturer, contract research organization. Very experienced, relatively inexpensive. A lot of pharma migrated a lot of work over to them. But now Congress basically came in and said, enough's enough. We're not going to do that anymore.
Mm.
You're taking NIH funded drugs
Right.
from a lab at a university, developing it using Chinese cheap, less expensive
Hmm.
solution, and then you come back and charge full boat cost here in the United States. That whole model doesn't play very well. Plus, most importantly, the last thing we need is to lose our advantage in biotech. We are, without a doubt, United States,
Mhm.
the leaders in biotechnology.
Right.
But we've seen what happened with chip manufacturing through the years.
Yeah.
It's probably best that we just keep it as opposed to let it migrate somewhere else and then try to bring it back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Jeff?
It totally does. Yeah. It's just such an interesting thing to really see how technology is making everything so much more global
Yeah,
across all fronts, pharmaceutical to a tech manufacturer to whatever it is, but really not really understanding the pain points that could be now existing 10 years that we just, to do it cheaper, to do it this, to do it that, right. To
yeah.
rush something. Yeah, it is wild. In your decades of doing this, where have you seen the technology increase a drug to market? Like, have you seen
Yeah.
like, oh my god, we could put
Two,
up an
two,
app by
two
the end
key,
of this call right now, right? Like, it's so
no, there's,
right.
there's that's a great question. There's
Yeah.
two key things. Um, that I think the biggest impact has been recognizing that when you do all your clinical trials, it's all about data management.
Mm.
And what we used to do is I would hire an individual CRO for phase one, another one for phase two, another one for phase three. Maybe it's the same one, but you got different teams and they're all building up separate data silos. And then at the end of that whole process of years, then you crunch the data and aggregate the data, which is tremendously expensive.
Sure.
Plus, you're filling in blanks where there's missing blanks and all this other stuff. To our credit, we're much more sophisticated now where we dump in a data management platform that underlays all of those clinical studies. And we can monitor them on an ongoing
Mm.
basis and call up, University of Idaho, your nurse or whoever did this last session with this patient didn't take their blood pressure.
Mm.
You have to go back to the chart, pull the blood pressure, put that in here.
Mm.
You clean the data up as you go, and
Right.
it's
Right.
much more efficient.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think that's really cool is, and the FDA is very supportive of this, is called a distributed clinical trial concept.
Mm.
So it used to be I'd have to go to the major university, Stanford. I'd go what's called an investigational, an IRB,
Okay.
an investigational review board.
Mm.
Takes 3 to 4, 5, 6 months. They have to review it to make sure it's safe, efficacious, and all that stuff. And then they would assign a primary investigator. And then you do the same thing at Stanford, UCSF, Cincinnati, et cetera, et cetera. Now what we can do is have one primary investigator, one IRB approval, and then you can distributed data, this distributed clinical trial approach. Let's say you have one patient up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You can have instead of having a PI there, onboard that patient into the clinical trial. Your remote PI that might be in San Francisco can do that. Okay, they find a local clinician, and then usually it's one or two on-site visits where they do the full workup of the patient, take blood and all that stuff. And then in the intermedium, let's say that I need to get monthly blood draws.
Mm-hmm.
Well, instead of having that patient come into the clinic to do that, you can send a local nurse out there,
Yeah.
do the blood collection, send it in. It's just much more efficient.
Right.
So it reduces costs and it simplifies things. And what I really like about it is the FDA loves this approach, and they want us to move in this direction because it's better data management, and it really comes down to quality of data
Yeah.
and consistency of data. So it cleans everything up nicely too.
That's great. That's great. Let's move over a little bit. Again, just you've got a lot of experiences. Like, what do investors look like in this space? You're describing a lot of stuff going on here. A lot of points where failure could happen, right? Just, so
Okay.
as an investor, what are they typically looking at? What are they seeing? How do they feel good about their investment? Like, what is this persona that goes, I
Yeah.
want to invest in this type of company?
Okay. Just to put context around it, to get to IND, about 5 million. To get through phase 1, 2, another 40 to 50 million, and then to finish your phase 3, anywhere from 300 million to another 800 million, right? So we're talking big dollars, and it's usually VCs that get involved.
Mm-hmm.
What's been interesting is the reason why I'm having such a challenge getting a VC on board right now is that from 2017 to 2021, almost every large VC will admit that they overfunded biotech by a factor of 2.
Mm.
And so they're waiting for those investments to either aggregate, consolidate, or wash out.
Yeah.
And so the number of new investments going in is a lot less than it was.
Mm.
And then the second thing is, we all go through these kind of fad phases.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's all about gene editing,
Mm.
artificial intelligence, and cancer, typically.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that now I think cancer is starting to play out because there's so many clinical trials. You can't hardly even recruit patients into certain indications because there might be 5 companies chasing that one patient for their 5 different clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's starting to, I think, fade a little bit. CRISPR gene editing, I think we're a ways away from that being an effective solution broadly.
Yeah.
But needless to say, there's still tremendous investment. And listen, I love the technology. Don't get me wrong. I just happen to have small molecule oral drugs and proteins, which are looked at as kind of old school, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is 95% of the drugs approved last year were small molecules and proteins.
Oh,
they weren't CRISPR gene editing.
Hmm.
So what's going on right now is you've got a few VCs. Corey Goodman at VenBio is an example. I'd say there's about a dozen to 2 dozen VCs that will do really deep due diligence, looking for new targets, looking for really innovative new technology.
Yeah.
And if you get through that due diligence and get one of those leads on board, everyone else will pile on.
Right.
There's a lot of others, VCs that will invest in biotechnology, but they just, for whatever reason, they didn't do the due diligence in the space, or they don't have the bandwidth to do the due diligence, but they're willing to follow a lead like a Arch or, Sequoia, one of the big VCs.
Interesting. How do you navigate fundraising when you're still at, will this really work? Right. I got to imagine that there still is also a fine line of, I'm not nuts. I have a theory that, we are still testing it, but we need to get to this point.
Yeah.
And how are you, when I got to imagine presenting to a VC or somebody that, and going, this allows us, that we really truly believe it. And maybe it is this due diligence you're talking about. It's your team, your experience, your track record in the past points in this direction. But it feels like that could be a real slippery conversation around, like, we think it's going to do this,
Well, first of all, if you're like my buddy Craig Gibbs, who has a track record of building companies and then selling them to big pharma for $4.7 billion, Craig doesn't have a problem starting Asher Bio and raising money.
Right.
And then, like a colleague I used to work with, Gina Chapman at Gilead, the same thing. She was at Genentech for decades in their oncology group. So she spins a company out and she can put the team together. And if you look at the top 10 variables that you talk to, the top 5 have to do with organization, team, and management and ability to execute. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I recognize that. We all recognize that. If you're lacking in that, and you're not just and you don't have that track record, and I'm one of those. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have to go back and, convince that the target is real, that your drug is effective, and it won't have side effects. It's safe, right? That's the bottom line. So here's an example. If you and I were to go to work out, regular exercise,
mm-hmm.
there's this protein called alpha-7 beta-1 integrin on your muscle fiber that will increase 200 to 300%, that stimulates myogenesis, and then the muscle fiber rebuilds, right? Mm. Or if we were professional athletes, like when I used to do Ironman triathlon, or like a professional cyclist, that alpha-7 beta-1 integrin would increase up to 500% until you regenerate the muscle. Well, our small molecule, what it does is it tweaks the gene that codes for that protein. So we can trick the body into increasing the alpha 7 beta 1 integrin up to 2 to 300%, just like you've worked out.
Hmm.
But in individuals that have limited mobility, like muscular dystrophy, this exercise mimetic concept will really play really well.
Hmm.
Okay. So if you can connect the dots with the normal physiology, and then you can show that your drug creates a similar dynamic and that it's safe and effective, then that's a really good story that's solid and you'll get investment. And that's where we're at with Sarcomatrix right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
As an example, well, and then where we're today, let's be honest, big pharma collaborations come in when you're phase 2 and beyond.
Mhm.
You've proved safety in humans and you have an efficacy signal in humans. And now you get the big bucks.
Yeah.
Okay. Or if you have some really, really, really cool target that you can validate, and then you'll get a lot less money from big pharma, but they'll invest early. And that's not really happening much lately.
Mm.
Um, so, where we're at right now is a bit of a struggle. So we look at inflection points. IND is an inflection point. If I can get 5 million, take it up to investigational drug approval, that's an inflection point. Now I can get 20, 25 million, take it to phase 3. Then that's another inflection point. Now you do your third, fourth raise, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So looking at inflection points is really important. And then even before I get IND approval, if I can show really good efficacy in a large animal model.
Mm.
So here's the reason, okay? 10% of oncology drugs that show efficacy in mice ever make it to the market.
Wow.
So we've cured a lot of cancer in mice, but not as much in humans.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
So once you get in the mice and the benchtop mice, those studies are inexpensive and easy to do, but they're not really indicating success. Usually in a disease space, there is a large animal model that works really well. And it just so happens in muscular dystrophy, with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, golden retrievers get Duchenne muscular dystrophy,
Mm.
the equivalent thereof. So we are actually in a golden retriever model. I'm not going to name the university because, listen, I'm not a big fan of having to use animals, but we have to use animals.
Yeah.
And PETA's gotten involved with some of these labs that have been, well, they're colonies of dogs with muscular dystrophy that you're breeding.
Mm.
Listen, it's a little odd. I get that, right?
Yeah.
So they've shut those down, and unfortunately, you'd want to be in an animal that's, a 1-year-old dog would be representative of a teenager and a human, and that's a great representation for Duchenne, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, we're in dogs that are 5 and 6 years old,
Mm.
so it's like a human that's had the disease for 4 or 5 decades,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's a tough model. Now, that being said, 2 days into treatment, once a day oral therapy that's safe and well tolerated, we've seen creatinine kinase markers go from 100,000 down to normal 1,000,
Mm.
like twofold difference.
Mm.
So we're very encouraged about what's going on
Yeah.
at Sarcomatrix with our small molecule for Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
It's interesting. I want to go back just a second. You said something a minute ago that kind of triggered something here around how much do you, as you're exploring this potentially for somebody that has the muscular issues, that this could be used for an athlete, as you're tying it to like the
Yeah,
cycle, right? So as you're going through this stuff, at what
yeah,
point do new opportunities present themselves? Is that a typical thing where you're like, oh
yeah,
my gosh, we started here,
yeah,
all athletes, the NFL should be using this so that they can play more Thursday games. I don't know, whatever it is, right? Like,
yeah.
and now all of a sudden you've opened that up, but it wasn't maybe the starting point. Is that a typical thing in this? Is that something that you hope for?
Well, listen, we launched Epogen in the late 80s and early 90s. So what it does is it increases the amount of red blood cells in your body, in your blood, right?
Mhm.
So it's like if you went to train at 14,000 feet, you'd get the same effect over 10 to 14 days. But um, I'm not getting into the details because it was a really challenging problem. But there was a bicycle team that started doping with it right away. And they went on a ride, and then half the team stroked out because they hadn't figured out how to use it the right way. So
Right.
listen, if there's risk involved in all this stuff, there is.
Yeah.
Now, to your point about indications and usage, so I show up to the Burkin lab, experts in laminin integrin, and they're really deeply focused on muscular dystrophies. Ryan Wubbles, our chief scientific officer, has a type of muscular dystrophy called FSHD. So I get why he would focus on it, and they focused on it. But when I started meeting with the team, I realized you guys are talking about muscle wasting. Muscle wasting is an imbalance between muscle atrophy or tear down and muscle hypertrophy and the ability to build it back up. And we all have that system. We have muscle repair systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the other indications for this drug, cachexia, is at some time in my life, if I have a chronic disease like COPD, or if I have a run of chemotherapy, or possibly if I take GLP-1s, I'm going to have muscle wasting, a transient muscle wasting episode, or an ongoing one, right? So that is called cachexia. And especially in the oncology space, I think this is a huge miss, Jeff. If you were to 75% of oncology patients that receive chemotherapy, drug therapy, they lose significant muscle mass. And we know that if you lose muscle mass during that therapy, your therapy is much less expensive. Not expensive, but not effective.
You're right. Yeah.
So I think that it's a huge miss in the oncology space. And I am talking to pharmaceutical companies about doing studies using our drugs to support muscle mass during chemotherapy administration. And then as we age into our 70s and 80s, no matter how much we exercise, how well we eat, and how well we take care of ourselves, 50% of us will have what's called sarcopenia, or age-related muscle wasting. And what does this lead to? It leads to less strength, balance issues, falls, broken bones, hospitalizations, all that good stuff. So what we're doing here, our strategy at Sarcomatrix, is to develop an independent pharmaceutical company focused on the muscular dystrophy space. I've done this at Amgen with Epogen. I did it at Gilead with their early AIDS drugs. I know how to do this. However, to do the sarcopenia, large indication, large population, and cachexia, expertise in cancer, I don't personally have that. So it's better that we out-license that.
Sure.
So that's why we're talking to pharmaceutical companies about out-licensing the cachexia and the sarcopenia indications.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you from
no, it
a
totally does.
strategic perspective?
Yeah, it does. It is interesting. Yeah. So if you had all the money that you needed, what would still be the problems that you think that you'd be navigating? Say, take the money portion out of it. The money's there.
Well, it really comes down to time. Time and cost of clinical studies. Those are the rate limiting steps.
Yeah.
And I have worked with, now the good news in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy space, there's been enough people come before me to refine the clinical trials.
Oh, good.
So what used to take 8 years, I can do now in 3. And so there's some things going on. First of all, we'll get accelerated approval. We complete phase 1, 2, and we could be on the market with a conditional approval. And then you do a validation study. And then if it proves efficacious, you keep it on the market. If your validation study fails, theoretically, the FDA takes your drug off the market. That hasn't happened as much as I think it should, frankly, because some of these, well, I won't get into the details there. I agree with the accelerated approval process on the condition that if your confirmatory trial fails, that you take the drug off the market. And I'm confident we'll be able to take care of that. And then the other thing that's coming along that's really helping a lot is they used to use something called a NASDAR scale, which was, I think, 15 different variables. Like they time, how long does it take for the child to stand up from a sitting position? How far can you walk in 6 minutes? How many stairs can you go up in X amount of time? That type of thing. Mm-hmm. Those are, at the end of the day, they tend to be kind of squishy variables. Mm-hmm. And it's not as exact as we would like.
Sure.
What we have now, though, is we have ankle bracelets that the patients wear so that you can measure gait, the frequency of the step, and the speed of the steps. And then you're getting many, many more data points. You're getting data points on a daily basis as opposed to every 3 months or so, or every 6 months. And because we're getting more data points and we have better objective measures, we can reduce the number of patients in the clinical trials, which means it's less costly and we can do them faster.
Yeah.
So there's things that are playing into our advantage that allow us to do this in 3 years. So if someone were to write a check for 50, 60 million right now, we would have our drug on the market in 2027.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is lightning fast with
Yeah.
drug development.
Yeah. No, it really is. Yeah, that's crazy. How Talk to me a little about how you navigate community that I have to imagine exists in this space, right?
Yeah.
So, and how do you sort of, I would imagine, step into it and say, "Hey, I'm working on this. I want your support. This is what we anticipate doing." And just how does community kind of play into this, especially with a disease like this that, it
Well,
on those.
I learned long ago at Gilead with the AIDS community
Mhm.
that communication is key, and you have to engage. And when you start the engagement, of course, it's going to be you're just doing it for the money and you don't
Right.
care
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
You actually have to genuinely care,
Yeah.
and if you don't, it's going to come through and you're in trouble.
Hmm.
It's not uncommon that a pharmaceutical company today will hire patient engagement individuals that put campaigns and programs together to make sure that the message of caring is coming through.
Yeah.
Back in the early days at Gilead, I remember days when we'd have activists outside throwing water balloons filled with red dye at the building. And, someone, you can't just ignore that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And you shouldn't ignore it,
Right.
right? So it's that experience with AIDS that allowed me to gauge early. So I have a relationship with Muscular Dystrophy Association, Cure CMD, Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. I also work with LAMA2, the a Cure Duchenne group, and then the LAMA2 societies all throughout Europe.
Mm.
I participate in monthly research um, collaborations and sharing to accelerate the development. And I was just at Cure Duchenne last week down in Florida, where it is their futures meeting, where pharma companies come in and present to the community, which is patients and families, members with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, about where we're at, answer the questions, what's coming down the pipeline, what can we expect. And I was really touched with that whole program is just unbelievable. Deborah Miller and her husband Paul have done a great job. And I said to Paul at the end of it, I said, you know what, if the congenital muscular dystrophy community had this level of support that you guys have done for Duchenne, I know without a doubt my niece would be alive today
Mm.
because of it's the support network, other individuals that have the disease. They talk about not only the drug, but physical therapy and
Yeah.
the challenges, and what do you have to do if your child is going to go to college, and all this stuff
Sure.
that is just life stuff that
Yep.
it was missing from. I think it's very unique what they have,
Yeah.
and I think more disease areas should adopt that model, and it has tremendous value,
Yeah.
no doubt,
Well, I
no
think
doubt.
this is. I want to follow up on that for just a moment. Like, when you envision this whole arch, how do you see patients' quality of life improving because this dream right now all came together, right? Like, how does quality of life really improve for a patient?
Well, let's look at the Duchenne patient. Duchenne, all muscular dystrophies are caused by genetic defects.
Hmm.
We have a lot of hope that one day gene editing to correct that gene defect will solve the problem.
Yeah.
But we're not even close to that today.
Right.
So a Duchenne patient, the average, usually in they'll know by the age 3 and 4, parents notice that something's not quite right.
Mm.
By the time that individual is a teenager, they're in a wheelchair and starting to lose upper body and lower body function.
Hmm.
By the time they're in their 20s, they'll have ventilation support, and it's not uncommon that they'll pass away from cardiovascular or respiratory failure like my niece did
Mm.
in their early 30s.
Yeah.
So our job is to extend their life to normal lifespans.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, some of the gene editing or the current therapies have right now turn a Duchenne patient into a less severe variant called a Becker's muscular dystrophy patient.
Okay.
But what they've basically done is pushed out a decade, maybe 2 decades, the same disease progression that potentially is less severe. Okay. So there's progress being made there. But, in our dog model right now, where the dogs were crippled in their hind end and now they're up and walking around, that's what we hope to take into humans.
Yeah.
With our drugs, if we can maintain muscle,
Yeah.
The first goal is maintain the muscle you have and don't lose any more.
Sure.
But in a perfect world, we regenerate lost muscle. And that's what we're really trying to do. So if we can stabilize and regenerate muscle and I think it will take combination therapy. Don't get me wrong. These are very complex diseases, much like oncology.
Yeah.
And it's going to take combo therapy. So it's probably CRISPR gene editing, exon skipping is an example. Small molecules like our drugs will penetrate muscle membrane really easily and get to all targets. The exon skipping drugs that they have right now will regenerate skeletal muscle, but they don't really impact cardiac muscle. So because these patients usually die from cardiac failure or respiratory failure, their lifespan will probably be about the same, if not. And there's this really weird dynamic if you think about it. If you improve skeletal strength without cardiac strength, and you're basically by overstressing the heart, you might actually decrease their life. So things like that are going on. So we need combination therapy, and then our small molecule actually gets into smooth muscle too. And I have to tell you, I may be one of like 4 people in the world right now that are thinking about this. Okay, if we solve for skeletal and cardiac, you still have gut issues with constipation and gut motility.
Yeah.
And then you still have, there's an impact on even on brain and mental acuity. And our drug would possibly penetrate the blood-brain barrier and may have an impact there.
Wow.
So we need to be thinking about all muscle types. And I'm really thinking long-term on how we solve for everything if we can.
Yeah.
Now, listen, the whole smooth muscle stuff, it's just concept right now. I haven't done any studies in it.
Yeah.
I'm a PharmD, so I think about this stuff at night when I can't sleep, but it's a bit of a fantasy. But it's that level of thinking and hope that I think drives things into the future.
Sure. Yeah. Well, how can investors get involved? They like what they're hearing here. They want to meet you. They want to know more. What should people do if they want to get involved?
Listen, if you're friends and family and you have as little as $500 and you want to make a difference, then we have a crowdfunding campaign on the Start Engine platform.
Cool. And we'll put that link for everybody, just so everybody knows. I'll put that link in the show notes if you want to check that out.
Okay. Yeah. And listen, we're doing a reasonable equity raise, and I'm not sure how much I'm limited to say right now, but if interested in that, go to the Start Engine platform, look up Sarcomatrix, and you'll get, a video about my niece and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay. What we really need is someone to step in, like a Reg D investor and angel, because with 2 million today, actually first, let me step back.
Yeah.
I've got great support from the Nevada Economic Development, called the Governor's Office of Economic Development, GOED, has a fund called the Battleborn Venture Fund that will match 1-to-1 first million in for Sarcomatrix. And this would make a tremendous difference right now. So even if we had one angel reg or some syndicate step in with $1 million, we could double that. Now, 5 million will get us to IND. So what we're really looking for is, it's almost a seed plus, right?
Sure.
So if we can get multiple angels in a syndicate, get to 5 million, and we're off to the races. Or if someone wants to step in right now with a kind of seed plus, A minus, investment of 10 to 15, whatever, I'm open for that. Now, as background, very small company, C Corp set up in Delaware, 10,000 shares issued right now, of which 6 million has gone to founders. There's 4 founders. We're open to pharmaceutical partnerships, investments, collaborations, and it's a blank slate, if you will. So if you're interested and someone wants to put in money, whether it's a convertible note, a safe, you want to buy equity today, et cetera, we're open for all those options.
That's awesome. Well, David, I appreciate this conversation. This was great. But before you go, I want to rip through 5 questions that have nothing to do with fundraising or pharmaceuticals or any of that stuff. So
Okay.
here we go. What are you watching on TV right now? Any shows you're watching?
Not many. I think it's The Resident
Okay.
because my wife calls it my soap opera.
All right. All right. That's good. How about books? Are you reading any books right now?
I'm actually reading Tom Sawyer. I'm going back and reading some of the classics that I read back when I was in high school, and I didn't really understand.
Sure.
Like Lord of the Flies is a pretty good read, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
bet it reads different now than when I read it in 10th grade,
yeah,
9th grade, whatever it was. Yeah. That's funny.
yeah.
How about podcasts? You listening to any podcasts right now?
I listen to The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe
Okay. What's that
on a
about?
regular basis, and then I tell you what, when I was commuting a lot, I listened to a lot more podcasts.
Yeah.
But I think in general, I try to keep up on industry specific podcasts while I'm working.
Sure.
And then I like to continue to develop leadership and management development skills, communication skills, that type of stuff.
Sure.
But
Sure.
yeah.
How about like magazines that you read or like places you go on the internet maybe for like, hey, this is where I get some good information from that kind of pushes you along?
Yeah. MIT Technology Review every quarter is a really good one. I like to think that I read The Economist. It turns out to be like a big pile of guilt after a while because it's so dense to get through that.
Sure.
But I find it to be probably one of the best information sources for breadth and depth of information
Yeah.
on really sticky topics, if you
Sure.
will.
Sure.
So, yeah,
Sure.
those are the two that I like in general.
Okay. And how about music? You listening to music right now?
Well, I'm a violinist.
Oh, nice.
So I have to, I'm not playing in a concert or a chamber music or in a symphony anymore. I usually I use it just to relax,
Hmm.
and to keep my ear in tune. I listen to classical music, and from time to time, I'll actually listen to tones on this app, and you have to guess that. Oh, that's a B major
Oh,
type of thing,
nice. Like
just
ear
to
training.
keep my ear.
Yeah.
And I have a really good ear to the point where um, my wife was teaching my daughter when she was 5
Hmm.
how to sing "God Bless America" or something,
Yeah.
and she was singing off tune, it was like a bad dad experience. I'm like, "Honey, you're not singing it the right way. You sound horrible."
Yeah.
And she gets really upset, and I said, "Well, here's the deal. No one in my family is going to end up on American Idol thinking they could sing
Yeah.
and that they can't sing. Period." So anyway,
Yeah, my version of that is because I own recording studios and I do live sound for like big mega churches and stuff that
oh, cool.
I pick out frequencies and then at the dinner I'm like, you guys hear how that 2K was a little too harsh right there? And my kids are
Yeah.
like, oh my god, get away from me. They will, I keep saying they will enjoy it one day when I have taught them the EQ spectrum and harshness
Perfect.
and all this verbiage around that was muddy. Did you hear how muddy that was right there? And they're like, I don't
Fun.
care, Dad. I don't care. I talk about microphones all day with my. I bring. Hey, do you guys hear that? They're using an RE20 on that.
I would enjoy that dinner. I would enjoy that dinner
See, some
tremendously.
people do, but man, my kids are annoyed with me on it. I'm lame. So,
Cool. Hey, Jeff, thanks for your time. I really
great
appreciate you
conversation. Yeah,
taking an interest in Sarcomatrix, what you do for investors, what you do for companies that need the investment. And I think you've got something real special here.
awesome. I appreciate it, David. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your day. Hey, everybody, in the show notes, I've got links. Go click around. You know, reach out, connect, invest, do all those types of things, and yeah, appreciate everybody. David, thanks again for your time.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye bye.